You are kneeling in sand that burns through your armor. Your throat is cracked leather. The sun overhead feels engineered, not weather but a weapon someone aimed and locked into position 3 hours ago. You cannot remember the last time you blinked without pain. Around you, men are dying in a way that makes no sense. Not charging, not fighting, just falling. One moment upright, the next jerking backward as if yanked by invisible rope. You hear the impacts before you see the arrows. A wet puncture that sounds almost gentle, followed by the metallic scrape of a man trying to remove something that has already decided where it will stop. The enemy is a horizon line that never resolves into targets. They refuse to arrive. Every time your formation advances, they dissolve into distance. Every time you halt, they return, not closer, just present again, like a fever you cannot sweat out. You have been walking toward them since sunrise. It is now past noon. You have covered less distance than you can see. Someone near you is screaming for water, but the sound is wrong. It is not frantic. It is administrative. He is reporting a malfunction in his body with the same tone he would use to request a replacement sandal. You recognize this voice. You realize it has been screaming for an hour. You realize you stopped hearing it as human 40 minutes ago. The man you are watching die is named Marcus Licinius Crassus. He is the richest man in Rome. He funded this war with his own fortune. 6 months ago, he stood in the Senate and explained why conquering Parthia was not ambition but arithmetic. Trade routes, tribute, plunder that would eclipse Pompey's eastern campaigns. He described wealth the way engineers describe aqueducts, as infrastructure that flows in one direction if you build the channel correctly. He engineered this moment. What he did not account for was that someone else had also done the engineering. You are watching the wealthiest man in the known world realize that his money has stopped functioning. Every tactical doctrine he purchased, every piece of intelligence he acquired, every assumption his gold validated, all of it has become ceremonial, decorative. The Parthians are not breaking the rules of Roman warfare. They are demonstrating that Rome's rules were always provincial, local, perishable. The army he bought is now an asset being liquidated in real time. Crassus built his fortune on a business model so elegant it became law. When fires swept through Rome, and fires were constant, inevitable, part of the city's metabolism, he would arrive with a private fire brigade. He would offer to purchase the burning property at a fraction of its value. If the owner refused, he would stand there and watch it burn. If they accepted, his men would extinguish the flames, rebuild the structure, and rent it back to Romans who had no other choice. He turned disaster into a subscription model. Suffering became a revenue stream. The Senate admired the efficiency. He applied the same logic to war. Suppressing Spartacus's rebellion was not a moral campaign, but a contract. He raised legions with his own money, crushed the slave revolt, and crucified 6,000 men along the Appian Way, one every 40 meters for 200 kilometers. The display was not vengeance, it was advertising, a monument to the cost of disrupting Roman commerce. It worked flawlessly. Until today. What is happening at Carrhae is not a battle, it is a controlled demolition. The Parthians are not fighting Rome's legions. They are running a stress test on Roman military doctrine and watching it collapse in sequence, system by system, assumption by assumption. Roman infantry doctrine is theological. It is built on the certainty that disciplined heavy infantry, arranged in tight formation, will outlast any cavalry force. Cavalry are shock weapons. They charge, they break, they retreat. Infantry endures. This is not opinion. This is physics, validated across centuries, encoded into training, muscle memory, institutional reflex. The Parthians are solving the problem differently. Their horse archers do not charge, they do not close. They orbit at a range where Roman javelins fall harmlessly into sand, and they fire, not in volleys, not in waves, but in a continuous mechanical rhythm that feels less like combat and more like industrial processing. Each archer carries a bow that requires both hands and the strength of a man's entire core to draw. The arrows do not arc, they fly flat, fast, and with enough force to puncture Roman armor at 200 meters. When the legions finally advance to engage them, the archers retreat. Not in panic, in rotation. Scripted, practiced. The Romans pursue, and the distance remains identical. The arrows continue. The Parthians are not fleeing, they are kiting. They have turned the battlefield into a mechanism with one moving part, the Roman formation, which must stay. Compressed to maintain integrity, which means it moves at the speed of its slowest soldier, which means it can never catch cavalry moving at a canter. Crassus orders his men to halt and hold position. The Parthians halt as well. They resume firing. The Romans lock shields and endure. The problem is that endurance has a unit cost, and the Parthians have introduced inflation. Arrows do not deplete. Every time a horse archer's quiver runs low, a camel train behind the line replenishes it. The Romans are not being defeated. They are being invoiced, and the Parthians have guaranteed next day delivery. Crassus orders a cavalry charge to break the archers and scatter the resupply line. The Roman horsemen advance, not confident but obedient, because obedience is the last thing they still understand how to perform. The Parthian horse archers part smooth and synchronized, like a curtain pulled aside to reveal what was waiting behind it. The cataphracts do not gallop, they surge. Horses and riders encased in overlapping scale armor that moves like liquid metal, lances longer than anything the Romans have seen outside of siege equipment. They do not scatter the Roman cavalry, they erase it. The collision is not combat, it is geometry. Objects moving at different speeds, intersecting, and the slower objects ceasing to exist in recognizable form. The cataphracts withdraw. The horse archers return. The arrows resume. Crassus is no longer giving orders. He is performing them. His son, Publius, takes a detachment and attempts a flanking maneuver. It is tactically sound. It is also expected. The Parthians envelop Publius's force, separate it from the main column, and extinguish it with the same procedural patience they have applied to everything else. When Publius's head is delivered to Crassus on a Parthian lance, it arrives not as a taunt but as confirmation. Your systems are no longer in effect. The Roman formation is now stationary by necessity, not strategy. Movement costs more lives than it gains. Staying still costs lives at a predictable rate. Crassus has been converted into a resource allocation problem with no optimal solution. The Parthians do not assault the position. They have no need. They have demonstrated something more permanent than victory. They have proven that Roman wealth, Roman discipline, and Roman doctrine are all architectures that function only within Roman territory. Outside that perimeter, they are cargo cult rituals, beautiful, intricate, and lethally irrelevant. When Crassus finally agrees to negotiate, it is not surrender. It is an acknowledgement that the battlefield has become a market, and he has no currency the Parthians recognize. The meeting is arranged under truce. The Parthian general, Surena, greets Crassus with a gift, a horse lavishly adorned offered as a gesture of respect between commanders. Crassus is helped onto the animal. This is when the perimeter collapses. Crassus's officers attempt to pull him free. The Parthians pull back. In the chaos, someone's blade finds Crassus's side. It is never clear whose. Marcus Licinius Crassus dies in the sand, surrounded by men trying to decide in real time whether saving him is tactically feasible or merely sentimental. The decision is made for them. The Parthians are already gone. They have taken what they needed, confirmation that Rome's wealthiest general died not in glorious battle, but in a scuffle over a horse, like a merchant arguing over a disputed invoice. What happens next is not recorded in Roman histories. It is preserved in Parthian theatre. According to those accounts, Crassus's severed head is delivered to the Parthian king during a performance of Euripides' The Bacchae, a play about a king torn apart by forces he could not control. The actor playing Agave lifts Crassus's head and presents it as a stage prop. The audience applauds the verisimilitude, but it is the second story that refuses to dissolve. Molten gold, they say, was poured into Crassus's mouth, either after death or in its final moments, depending on which account you trust, though trust is a word that has no framework here. The gold, a substance Crassus spent his life accumulating, measuring and wielding as leverage, is introduced into his body as a solution. Not as wealth, as weight, as temperature, as a literalization of what he tried to make Rome swallow. The image is so vivid, so symbolically complete, that Roman historians reject it as propaganda. Parthian invention. Theatrical embellishment. They are likely correct. The molten gold almost certainly did not happen. But here is what did happen, and what those same historians do not dispute. Over 20,000 Roman soldiers were killed at Carrhae. 10,000 were captured and marched east into Parthian territory, where they were settled in frontier military colonies and never seen again. Their names were not recorded. Their families received no confirmation. Rome did not ransom them. Rome did not negotiate for their return. Rome did not build monuments to their sacrifice. Rome declared the standards they carried lost, which was true. Rome declared the campaign a disaster, which was accurate. What Rome did not declare, and what the molten gold story exists to remind us, is that those men were always expendable. They were assets Crassus liquidated in pursuit of a return that never materialized. The gold poured into his mouth is the story Parthia needed to tell because Rome refused to. Whether it happened is irrelevant. It is true. The Senate debated how to frame Crassus's death. He could not be honored as a martyr. The defeat was too absolute. He could not be condemned as reckless. Too many senators had supported the campaign. The solution was administrative. His death was noted. His wealth was inherited. The war was suspended, not concluded. Parthia remained unconquered. The topic was closed. The soldiers who died at Carrhae were entered into records as losses, not individuals, not men with families who waited for letters that would never come. Losses. The bureaucracy absorbed them. They became data. The system continued. Crassus designed that system. He understood its language. He knew how to convert suffering into value, how to extract profit from catastrophe, how to make disaster a tradable asset. What he did not account for was that he too could be converted, that his wealth could be recontextualized, that his body could become the commodity. The Parthians did not need to pour gold into his mouth. They only needed to make Rome imagine it, to plant the image so clearly that Roman minds would fill in the details. The heat, the liquid metal forcing its way past teeth, the steam rising from tissue never meant to touch anything that temperature. The story does not require verification. It requires Rome to flinch. And Rome did flinch. And then Rome moved on. The mechanism that produced Carrhae did not end. It adapted. The logic that sent 20,000 men into a desert they could not map, chasing wealth they could not secure, enforced by doctrine they never questioned. That logic is still operational. The math still works. You simply adjust for losses and recalculate acceptable risk. Crassus was not an aberration. He was a proof of concept. The gold is still molten. It is still looking for a mouth.